Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa usalli wa usallam ala Sayyid al-awwaleen wal akhirin. Nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. All praise are due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be constantly showered upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, the master of the first and the last, and upon his family, his companions, and all those who call to his way and establish his sunnah to the day of judgment. As to what follows, my beloved brothers and sisters, to our friends, our listeners, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for another opportunity to share what He has revealed to us as a human race. And we pray that Allah would help the knowledge that we are gaining to be ilmun nafi'a, and that is beneficial knowledge. Not just knowledge where the person takes in information, numbers, and names, but information that affects their life and that gives them the ability to distinguish between the truth and the falsehood. And that is so important when we are dealing with the history of the Muslim world, because this history has been interpreted in so many different ways that sometimes it gets confusing for a person who has recently embraced Islam, or a person who is returning to his or her faith, wanting to get an Islamic point of view. And when we say an Islamic look at history itself, we're not just looking at the names and comparing them as though they are equals, but we are recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of the heavens and the earth. And that is through the power of Allah Azza wa Jal that He has revealed His message from the beginning of time. And we recognize the critical importance of this understanding of Tawheed in our look at history. So in a sense, this is a Tawheedic look at history, recognizing that it's not just human beings who are making their history, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately has power over all things. And in judging the value of individuals, we're not just taking it by the name, but we're looking at the issue, or we're looking at the claim, not just from the surface, but the essence of the claim. So when a person says that they are Muslim, that is submission to the will of Allah. When the person says that they are a follower of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that means that they literally follow the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam in all aspects. And so the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, in speaking with knowledge from above seven heavens, Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu anh reported that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "The devil is like a wolf among humans, as a wolf is among sheep. It snatches the stray sheep. So beware of the paths which branch off, and adhere to the jama'ah, the masses, and the masjid." So the Prophet ﷺ is saying, "Iyakum wa shi'ab, wa alaykum bil jama'ah, wal amma, wal masjid." That is the essence of the Muslim world. And so when we are talking about Sunni and Shia, they're not equal. The Prophet ﷺ made it clear what the basis of Islam was. It is not just a book that came down and you read it as though it is the title only of a chapter, but a book which is explained through the prophetic lifestyle. And that message is very clear. And the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, "Taraktukum ala al-mahajjatil bayda, layluha ka nahariha, la yazighu anha illa halik." I have left you on a clear way. Its night is like its day, and only the one who is destined to perish will stray from the path. Layluha ka nahariha. There's no confusion inside of this message. And so it was in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. There was no confusion in his message. His sunnah was very clear because he was the sunnah. And his followers knew what they had to do in order to follow the path. But the Khawarij, and we had learned in our last discussion that a group of the Muslims, when the great fitna or the time of sedition came during the period of the Khulafa Rashidin, and Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anh was assassinated. Ali radiallahu anh took over the leadership. Muawiyah then had a difference of opinion. And we learned at that time that when this confusion was happening and the great Sahaba were holding on, that a number of the Muslims couldn't take it. And they lost their sense. And they went outside of Ali. And this was the first great sect of Islam called Al-Khawarij. These are the people, Kharaju anhu. They went outside of the great Khalifa Ali radiallahu anh. And for more understanding of this, go back to our first session, and you will be able to see the details concerning the Khawarij, how they developed, what they actually did. But the question that came the last time is about Ibadiyah. And Ibadiyah is the group of the Khawarij when Ali realized who they were and what they were doing, and the fact that they were attacking his people, he then laid siege to them and he defeated them. But a small group were able to escape. And a leader by the name of Abdullah ibn Ibad, he left with some of his followers. He was from the Tamimi tribe, and he went down into the Arabian Peninsula, into what is now Oman, and settled there, and his followers settled there, and they went underground. So this is what is the remains of the Khawarij movement in Oman. There was a section that also went to Algeria as well. And this group later became known as Ibadiyah. And so this is not Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. This is not Shia. This is Ibadiyah. And the Ibadiyah, although they claim that they follow the Quran, they have their own hadith books, and they have their own fiqh. And they took an extreme position in the beginning and for years that the rest of the ummah were going to hell. And they had takfir bil ma'asi, that if a person made minor sins, that person is kafir, they are a disbeliever. They have gone through a lot of change, as the kingdom of Oman has gone through a lot of changes as well, because the Omanis spread into East Africa, and they integrated with the Ahl Sunnah, especially the Shafi school of thought. And so now Oman has changed, and the Ibadiyah has gone through a change. So the present day Ibadis are accepted by the scholars of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And instead of saying that the Sunni groups and the Shia and everybody is all kuffar, they say kufr and ni'mah. They're saying that they denied the blessings, not that they denied all of Islam. So it's a minor sin, and they are not taking the extreme position for the most part. So this is the Ibadiyah, and they pray with their hands on the side, looking like the Shia, but they are not. They are actually living in Oman, and they have their own way, but they are allowed to make Hajj and Umrah. And you can get more information if you go to our last session or look up Ibadiyah with the present group that is there. So our great scholar Ibn al-Jawzi, Sheikh Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah, the great Hafiz, the great Shaykh al-Islam of the Hanabila, he was reported to have written a number of books, one of them Talbis Iblis, and that is the devil's deception. And this is the main source that we use for this part of our understanding. Excellent work by Ibn al-Jawzi, sifting through the cobwebs, sifting through the madness, and showing the clear Sunnah and where it stood. And as our Islamic historian giving us that Tawhidic understanding of what happened to the Muslim world, and we have to remember that Islam is still spreading rapidly. But even though there was a fitna and the Khawarij people were tricked by the shaitan, they went outside of the Imam or the Khalifa, Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anh, and they became total extremists. In the same way that they were tricked, there were other people who were being tricked. And this is the group that was being poisoned first by the teachings of Abdullah ibn Saba, who was teaching the divinity of Ali radiallahu anh. And this is the birth of what we now know as the Shia. And it's important because, again, they say Sunni Shia, as these are two equal groups in the Muslim world. That is not true, because the Sunni or the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah has always been the main body of Islam. 85 to 90% of the Muslims up until today is the Sunnah. The word Shia in Arabic is a sect. It is a group. So when you say Shia, you're talking about a group, not the main body. And it was first used as Shia to Ali and Shia to Muawiyah. So when there were two big bodies fighting against each other, they said there's one group following Ali, another group following Muawiyah. But after the assassination of Ali and Al-Hassan taking over and then giving the leadership to Muawiyah, then the leadership of the Muslim world became not Shia to Muawiyah, but it became the Umayyad Caliphate. So this is important because remember now when the Khawarij sent out their assassins to kill the major leaders who were disagreeing and not in their claim using the Quran as the basis of their decision. They succeeded in killing Ali. They did not kill Muawiyah or Amr ibn al-As, but the two armies were there. And so Muawiyah's army facing the rule of Al-Hassan, who was chosen by the Muslims, and he ruled for 6 months, so he could be considered to be amongst the Khulafa al-Rashidin. Al-Hassan, as predicted by the Prophet ﷺ, would bring peace between two great armies, and he gave over the leadership to Muawiyah. And this is important for us to understand, because at that time there is no Sunni group and Shia group. The main body of the Muslim world accepted the leadership of Muawiyah, radiallahu anh. He was Katib al-Wahi. He was one of the people who wrote the revelation. And even though the scholars believed that Ali was correct, the overwhelming majority accepted the leadership of Muawiyah. So that year was called Am al-Jama'ah. That was the year of the Jama'ah. Remember what the Prophet said, Alaykum bil Jama'ah, right? He said, follow the Jama'ah. And so everybody basically accepted this, except for a few extreme elements. Even Al-Hussein at that time, he made conditions, but he retired to Al-Madinah. He accepted this rule. And the great fitna, or the great confusion that had hit the Muslim world, was over. And that is a major time for the believers. Shortly after this, Al-Hassan died of poisoning, rahimahullah. And the Umayyads were now, in effect, the rulers, meaning the people under Muawiyah, but it was a valid Khilafate. So he was the Khalifa of the Muslim world. And struggle was happening, calling to the good and forbidding evil. Scholars were being supported. Even the family of the Prophet ﷺ was being supported. But Muawiyah's great mistake was that instead of allowing Shura to choose the next leader, he chose his son Yazid to follow him. So the Khilafate became a kingdom. Even so, the majority of the companions accepted it. Some were reluctant. The main contenders who did not accept Yazid were Al-Hussein ibn Ali, now that's obvious, but also Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Zubair, Abdullah ibn Abbas, and Abdurrahman ibn Abi Bakr. Now look at these are the sons of major companions. They were in opposition to Yazid taking over. When pressure was applied, in order to bring about peace, Abdullah ibn Umar and Abdullah ibn Abbas, they pledged. They did not want another fitna to start. But Al-Hussein and Abdullah ibn Zubair, they refused to accept this leadership. Now, these are very important foundations that we need to go over and over again, trying to understand basically what happened. We recognize the fact that the Umayyad dynasty was in the rule, that Yazid was a valid Khalifa, although there were reasons for people not to accept him. And Al-Hussein, radiallahu anh, he rejected Yazid and sent Musab ibn Aqil to Iraq. But Yazid sent Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad, and Muslim was killed, and Hussein, unaware of this, took his family and moved toward Kufa. Now, Kufa, remember, was one of the main two cities in Iraq at the time. Kufa was a center of confusion and ideologies and magic and so many areas. Kufans had very vocal personalities, but they were also very fickle. And when the rebellion was crushed, they changed their mind, and Al-Hussein, radiallahu anh, found himself alone. The Umayyads sent an army led by Umar ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, who was a righteous person. But this was diverted, to a northern expedition. And Ibn Ziyad and Hussein dialogued. It didn't work out. And the terrible tragedy of Karbala took place. Al-Hussein, radiallahu anh, and his group were slaughtered, except for Ali Zain al-Abidin, his son. The Iraqi Kufans, who did not come out to support Al-Hussein, although they supported, realized their mistake. And they became known as At-Tawwabun. They returned to Karbala in shame. They made penance, and they began to do extreme practices. Now, this is where your different practices of the Ashura. So the Ashura that most Muslims know is on the 10th of Muharram, and that is because of Musa alayhi salam, and the fact that when the Yahud came to Medina, they were fasting on the 10th because of Musa's escape from Fir'aun, right? But this new form of Ashura is something that the Tawwabun instituted, not from the Sunnah. And so it took on a new life, the Ta'ziyah, where they are in repentance and sadness. And this extreme concept of imamate started to come in. People beating themselves, pouring blood, doing all types of practices which are far away from the Sunnah. This starts happening, has nothing to do with the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But the dangerous part of it is that the door is open because the new practices are coming in. Then the thoughts of the magicians, the thoughts of the former Persian dynasty, those who did not accept Islamic rule, start to come in. And so this is what you could call a transition of Shiism. Now remember, there is no Shia to Muawiyah, that's the Umayyads. The Shia became known as the Shia to Ali, mainly in Iraq, because the Umayyads attacked Mecca, where Abdullah ibn Zubair, radiallahu anhuma, was based, and they defeated him. So it was all under the Umayyads. The only opposition was the Shia in the area of Iraq. And so this is what you could call political Shiism. They are against the oppressive Umayyad rule. And this is very important because up until today, people get confused with political Shiism and theological Shiism. political Shiism is the opposition to Yazid and the oppressive Umayyad rule. And that was the main opposition, was not only al-Hussein, but Abdullah ibn Zubayr and Muslims throughout the Muslim world. But the change starts happening with what could be called theological Shiism. And that is where the extreme elements start to come in. The deification of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. And then people so angry and so extreme that they start to even curse Abu Bakr and Umar. And the former Sassanid supporters, the ones who lost their Persian leadership, start to come back to take advantage. The followers of Ibn Saba, they join the ranks. So this is what you could call theological Shiism. The difference between the two: political Shiism is just opposition to the Umayyads, but in practice, they're Sunnis. Theological Shiism is where they actually start to change. Now, this is where you can really see it. And it is reported that one of the Imams, so-called Imams under the Shia, Zayd ibn Ali ibn al-Hussein, right? So there's one of Ali Zayn al-Abidin's sons. He was coaxed to rebel against the Umayyads. But they said, curse Abu Bakr and Umar. He refused because he's following the Sunnah. How could you curse Abu Bakr and Umar? And so they refused to follow him, even though he announced his rebellion against the Umayyads. And when that happened, he said, Rafadtumuni, you have denied me. And so this group called a Rafida, that becomes the imamate, known as the Twelvers in a sense. And the other group, the political, what is left of the political Shiism, is more like the Zaydiyah. So the Zaydi followers who followed Imam Zayd, who is a valid son coming under al-Hussein, remember that side of the family. Okay, so he has the bloodline. Remember, al-Hussein married Shirbanu, who is the daughter of the Sassanid Shah of Iran. So the divine, so-called divine blood of the Persians, the blood of the Prophet ﷺ, Imam Zayd had all of this, but he refused to join this theological extreme. That's the difference. And that's what people get confused with up until today, between political Shiism and the theological. Now, again, I just wanted to take, for those who are new in this, and just to give a little review in our minds so you can actually see this. Go back to the family tree of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, for those who can follow this. And you'll see Hashim, his family, Abdul Muttalib, and you see there's a split in Mecca with Umayyah and Hashim. From Abdul Muttalib, you have Al-Abbas, Abu Talib, Hamza, Abdullah, Abu Lahab. These are the sons of Abdul Muttalib. From Abdullah, of course, you have the Prophet ﷺ. So that's the Hashemite line. Remember the other side, of course, the Hashemite line, remember Abu Talib, his son Aqil, Jafar, and Ali. Now, there are other sons of Abu Talib as well. These are the three most famous. So here's Ali, okay? Now, that's the first Imam of the Shia, right? That's where they stop. Although this means nothing special to the Sunnah. He is the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, who was raised in his house, beloved person, one of the most eminent of the companions, the first male to accept Islam, although he was a young person. On the other side, remember that struggle between Hashemites and Umayyah. Then there is Harb and Abu Sufyan. From him comes Muawiyah. So you can see a struggle, a power struggle that could take place when people get weak in their faith. The Prophet ﷺ had no sons that lived. So by the will of Allah, Ali married Fatima. From their union came Hussein, Hassan, and later on for other marriages, Muhammad ibn Hanafiya. This is from Ali. But the key three people, Al-Hussein, Al-Hassan, these are the key people. And from Al-Hassan, his family, he had 21 sons, so there's a lot of Hassanis spreading around. Came the Idrisids. They ended up in Fez in North Africa. So the Ahlul Bayt people who are ruling Morocco up until today are Idrisids, and they relate to Al Hassan's family, right? Not Hussein. Okay, this is for your general understanding. But on the side of Hussein, they considered Hassan to be the second Imam, meaning the leader of the Ahlul Bayt, family of the Prophet ﷺ. Then the third was Hussein. After his demise, his death, his son Ali Zain al-Abidin. Following Ali was Muhammad al-Baqir. Now, this is when you see Zayd and what split off from Zayd, which is the Zaydiyah. Remember, Rafad Tumuni. But following Muhammad al-Baqir, there is Ja'far as-Sadiq, the sixth great Imam of the Shia, the Twelvers, although that was not the term they were using at the time. He was a teacher and colleague of Imam Malik, rahimahullah, of Imam Abu Hanifa. So they were all the same. They were all under the Sunnah. There was no Shiite sect and Sunni sect. They were friends and colleagues of each other in Medina. But to take care of the family, to represent the family, he was number 6, and he looked toward his son Ismail, but Ismail passed away before Ja'far, and so the rule went to Musa al-Kadhim, who is number 7. Now, those who wanted Ismail to be number 7, although he died, they accepted his son Muhammad ibn Ismail, and that is where Ismaili Fatimids come from. Now you see it here. Okay, so on the one side, there's Musa al-Kadhim, then there's Ali Rida, number 8, there's Muhammad al-Taqi, number 9, Ali al-Hadi, number 10, Hassan al-Askari, number 11, Muhammad al-Muntadha, number 12, the last Imam of the Twelvers. On the other side is the Ismaili Shiism. So you see how the Shia breaks up. So there's one side called the Twelvers, and the other side Seveners, because they believe that the imamate ends at 7. So keep this in mind. This is the general setup that you'll see that is coming. Again, amongst the imams that are there, from the Tawhidic Ahlus Sunnah position, they were not separating themselves in terms of their faith. The great imams there loved the Prophet ﷺ. They were not cursing him. It is only the extremism amongst the followers. But what developed in theological Shiism, and again, this is important for us to be able to distinguish it. What develops, there's 5 key concepts, and we discussed these in detail in our previous sessions. But for those who are new and to review in our minds, what are the distinguishing points of Shiism? Number 1 is the concept of imamate, that there is not only prophets who are musharri', lawmakers, but there are prophets and there are imams. So amongst the Shia, in varying degrees, the imam has law-giving powers. This is imamate. And in some extreme cases, as we'll see, the imam then becomes like a divine being. All creations submit to the imam. And there are varying degrees of the concept of imamate. Many people, again, those who are clinging to political Shiism, they believe that the imam should just be the leader of the Muslim world. But the religious Shiism, that underlying group, and that is where the disbelief comes in, is when they start putting the imams over the prophets. Number 2, the position on the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, that in some cases amongst the Shia, and again, you cannot put them all in one stroke, that amongst the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they say Khan al-Amana, Khan al-Risala. They deceived the trust, they deceived the message, that only a small group of companions, only a few, including Salman al-Farisi and Miqdad, just a few, that they say followed the message properly, but the majority were involved in khiyana, treachery. And that's a serious thing to say the companions of the Prophet ﷺ were treacherous. Because the Prophet, peace be upon him, when people even amongst the companions cursed each other, he said, "Do not curse my companions." Because if you gave Mount Uhud in gold, you could not give what they gave. Do not curse my companions. Number 3, their perspective on the Quran. Elements amongst the Shiite groups say that the Quran was not complete, that it's not the real book. And there are varying elements. There's even a group saying Surah al-Wilayah, that they have chapters that's not in the main book. They refuse to accept the Quran of Uthman, getting political again, and then trying to say he's like an Umayyad. So their perspective is off of the Quran. And if somebody says they don't accept the Quran as the book of Allah, the protected book of Allah, this is a problem in terms of their faith. Number 4, temporary marriage, mut'ah. This is not accepted by the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and it is accepted, it's a fiqh point, amongst the Shia. And 5, the doctrine of taqiyya or tuqiyya, and this is where you could lie, a Shia, a person could lie to a Sunni, could disguise their words and get blessings for this. So these are some of the key distinguishing points among other things. Now, what is important to understand, now remember what the Prophet ﷺ was saying, alaykum bil jama'ah, wal amma, wal masjid. So stick to the jamaat and the masses of the people and the masjid. So up until the 16th century AD, now if you're talking about the 7th century AD of the actual prophethood, and to the 16th century, 900 years, there is no major Shia group that is there of the 12 Shia. So the main group that follows the 12 Imams did not have a state. And that is important to understand. So when you try to say they're equal, they're not equal. The masses of the Muslim world was following the Sunnah, even with the political differences. But it was in the 16th century that the Safavid dynasty was established. They claimed descent from the 7th Imam Musa al-Kadhim. The founder, Shah Ismail, he was Turkish. Turks' very strong personality and military. But he declared Shiism as the state religion of Persia. He executed people who were against this. Now, this is strange because when you think of Persia, Iran in particular, you think that this is a Shiite state right from the time of Ali and Muawiyah. No. When you look at the Sunnah, the establishment of the Sunnah, and you look at the great Imams, if you look at Bukhari and Muslim, at Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, and Nisa'i, you can go on in the Imams, you see that the great majority of the famous Imams, collectors of Hadith, came from this area of southern Russia, Khorasan, and Persia. This was Sunni territory. This was not a Shiite land. And it was only in the 16th century when the Safavids now took over and made Shiism the state religion, which up until now within their constitution, the leader must be Ithna Ashari Shia. Okay? So this is important to understand, again, when we're making comparisons between the Sunnah and the Shia. Extremely important point to keep in mind as we go on. So there is no confusion with these little isms and schisms and small groups that start to develop. Now, the mainstream Shia. There is another major river, a stream, and that is Batiniyah, or the Batinites. And this group comes from the concept of al-batin, which means the inside of a thing, and the zahir, or zahir, some people pronounce, is the outside. So people try to say that with everything there is an outside, superficial, and then there is an inside. And the Batinites, or the Bataniyah, this group of people, occult, underground people, they hid behind Islam. and they leaned toward the Shia teachings. But it was the devil's deception, and it was the intrigue of the former religious leaders, political leaders, the Jahiliyyah of Persia and all the ancient time, combined, coming together in these Bataniyah groups. This is an underground stream which literally led them outside of Islam. And you'll be surprised to know, again, the word Shia is being used, but the Itna Ashari Shia, the Twelvers, who, remember, from Imam Jafar as-Sadiq's time and their other Imams, they were following the Sunnah. And up until now, they are making Hajj, and they are accepted. But within their ranks are these evil teachings. The Bataniyah, Itna Ashari considered them to be outside of Islam. And so this is a strange phenomenon. Why would they consider the Bataniyah to be outside of Islam? Remember these concepts, because with these groups coming in now, their intention was negation of the Creator. Because remember, Islam is Tawheed. So when you say La ilaha, no God, nothing worthy of worship, clean slate, illallah, except Allah. So you cannot have any other deity. You can't have the sun. You can't have the Shah. You can't have the Pharaoh. You can't have Buddha. You can't have anything else that you worship through or believe is the divine being except Allah. They fought back. And they wanted to cover, remember, Talbis Iblis, to cover up this concept of Tawheed and to negate it, and to put in other concepts of the creative force, the ultimate force. They also wanted to invalidate prophethood, because if you invalidate prophethood and you put something else inside of there, now you got a serious problem. Especially you putting in imamate. So you invalidate prophethood, you're basically breaking the kalima in half, you're destroying Islam. To invalidate worship, and that is, of course, not only our salah, our hajj, our zakat, our fasting, but our major ibadah, from the sunnah, from the way shown by Jibril alayhi salam, and through this to deny the hereafter. And that is an extreme form that become more involved in the life of this world. So this is the stream of al-Batiniyah. And it came literally in this underground movement. What is the philosophy of the Bataniyah? I like to use the example of this plant, this lychee, or in America they say the lychee plant. And this lychee plant, which the Chinese had developed, it's a beautiful example of the Zahir and Batin. Because if you look on the outside of it, it's a rough-looking plant. And when you look at the skin, nobody would want to take that in and eat it. You would not to ingest the outside. But if you take the skin off, there is a beautiful, sweet, soft inside. And so that is the concept that they were using, that they are the literal text of the Quran and Hadith, but there's inner meanings as well. So if you get caught on the outside, right, then you're deluded. It's like you're eating the outside of the lychee plant. But if you go to the interior, then you get the essence and you're released from the burden of the Sharia, and it gives room to do what you want to do. And you can literally put in what you want to put. And that's where the other religions and concepts come in. So this is the danger of this concept of Zahir and Batin. Yes, we know that there are certain things that are on the exterior, and there is an interior. We know that. We know that the heart of the individual is the essence. But the Prophet ﷺ taught everything together. Remember, when he spoke to Jibril alayhi salam, he taught him what is Islam. That is the question of Jibril in the famous hadith. What is Iman? And what is Ihsan? Righteousness. So all three levels are there. Islam is your outward practice, 5 pillars. Iman is your faith. Ihsan is your righteousness. That's the inside. That's where the tasawwuf comes. That is where your spirituality. It's all taught together. But this concept separates it. And so remember now, going back, let's connect it now. The death of Ismail, right? The son of Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, right? And then Musa al-Kadhim is chosen as the 7, but a branch said no. Ismail was number 7, even though he died early. So we'll choose his son because he's the direct descendant as the 7th Imam. So with this branch, their Imams and their occult leaders found a door that was opened. And they disguised themselves. And one of the most famous of these underground people that can be traced is Abdullah ibn Maymun al-Qaddah. This is an occultist. This is he died around 825 AD. And he became one of the chief missionaries and ideologues of the Bataniyah movement. Okay, so this is important now. They concealed themselves in Basra, that's in Iraq, and also Salamiyah. Salamiyah became one of the bases of the Bataniyah movement. And it is this movement, they formed their secret societies, and they developed within their secret societies gradations, initiations, secret rituals. Their key number was 7. So they're known as the Seveners or the Sab'iyyah. And this is important because there are many occult movements that are developed based upon this occult type of teaching. Remember now, Iraq was the basis of magic because as in Surah Al-Baqarah, we know about Babel, where magic was introduced through Harut and Marut. So the occult groups developed there and took different forms. And later on, when the Crusaders came in and they intermingled with the Bataniyah people, took back their teachings, that is one of the bases of the Freemason movement. So when you look at the Freemason movement, Illuminati, and the occult groups of today, you will see a connection that is there through the Bataniyah movement, because there is no outside Sharia. Again, when you eliminate the Sharia, the Quran and the Sunnah, that's the basis that Allah has protected for us. Take off the protection, then you can do what you want to do. And so you'll see the gradations of the Freemasons, their numbers, up until the 33 degree. You will see that the number 7 being used. And you'll see some of the Masonic groups actually wearing fez and actually naming themselves with Islamic names. That is what they took back from the Crusades. But getting back to the essence of our topic, and this is crucial how it starts to develop. The 9th century chief missionary, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein al-Shi'i of Yemen, this is one of the missionaries coming from Salamiyah. He was a Yemeni, and he proclaimed himself Bab al-Mahdi. So he was the door to the Mahdi. Now remember, amongst the 12ers, they believed that the Mahdi, the 12th Imam, had gone into an occult state. So they are waiting for somebody to come. Amongst the Sunnah, the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, there is a belief that the Imam or that the Mahdi will come near the end of time. His name is Muhammad, his father's name is Abdullah, his mother's name is Amira. He has a high forehead, a high bridge nose. He will fill the earth with justice and righteousness when it is filled with oppression. That is a Sunnah belief. So everybody, up until today, people are waiting for the Mahdi. Now think about this. This is the 9th century. That's a long time ago. Even at that point, because of the confusion in the world, they were waiting for the Mahdi to come. So Abu Abdullah al-Hussein al-Shi'i, he claimed he was the Bab. So this is a new concept coming in. He was the door to the Mahdi. And through him, the final teacher who would come, the guided one, would come into the world. And he took his teachings from the Arabian Peninsula and the Levant, he took it to North Africa. And his base of operations he found in a place later called Al-Mahdiyah. And this is in Tunisia. And Tunisia is an extremely important country. You remember in the time when Islam was spreading, and Uqba ibn Nafi', rahimahullah, the great Tabi, took Islam all the way over to the Atlantic Ocean. This was Al-Maghrib. His base of operations was Qayrawan. Qayrawan was a little bit down in the interior of Tunis. And later that area became known as Ifriqiya. That was the base of the Muslims. It is here in Qayrawan and this area that the Maliki fiqh was codified. That is the teachings of Sahnun, the great Imam Malik, rahimahullah. And the Malikiyah spread all throughout North Africa to Al-Andalus, down into West Africa, into Central Africa. This is a strong area of the Sunnah and Amal Ahl al-Medina, the actions of the people of Medina. But in this area, there were disgruntled people as well. And amongst the Amazigh, who are the native indigenous people of North Africa, there were disgruntled groups. And so Abu Abdullah then found support, and he made Al-Mahdiyah as his base of operations. It's a beautiful area. And this is the main masjid there in Al-Mahdiyah that you can see on your left. And he developed what is known as Dola al-Fatimiyah, and this is the Fatimid state or the Fatimid Caliphate. And this is where they ruled from 909 to 1171. Now, remember, this is not Itna Ashari Shia. So this is extremely important to distinguish. Itna Ashari Shia did not have a state until the 16th century. Remember, the Safavids. This is the Bataniyah, spreading the teachings, those secret underground teachings. And they spread it, and they chose strategically Mahdiyah as their capital. This is an extremely important place. If you look at the map where Mahdiyah is, it is at the mouth of the center of the Mediterranean region. To your left is Al-Andalus. And Al-Andalus still at that time was a great center of Islam. There was actually a Khalifa, another Khalifa, actually announced himself An-Nasir li-Dinillah, and that is the Nasirid dynasty. So Al-Andalus was one of the most powerful areas in the Muslim world, and a lot of traffic and business. It had, Cordoba was one of the largest cities on earth at the time. Okay, so traffic coming across the Mediterranean. It has to pass, you see where Italy is and Sicily, and then Tunisia, Mahdiyah. It goes then down to Egypt and to the Red Sea and over to Istanbul and to Turkey and to the other areas. So this is a strategic center of the Mediterranean region. So not only is it strategic in terms of the people who are Amazigh, very strong, but also economically, politically. And the Fatimids expanded because of this. And with their rule and with the Amazigh people, who have very strong personalities, and once a group of the Amazigh, although it's not the majority, but once a group of Amazigh is in back of you, you have strong personality people. These are African people and very powerful. And so when they get in back of you, you have a force that is in back of you. And these Fatimids made a number of achievements. They founded the city of Al-Qahira. And this is something that a lot of people don't realize, that the basis of the foundation of the city was Fustat in the time of Amr ibn al-As, but Al-Qahira that we know today was founded by the Fatimids. And Jami al-Azhar University, was founded by the Fatimids. Of course, it was teaching originally Bataniyah teachings were being taught. So this is interesting now. But the power that they developed reached to the point, if you look back at this map, you will see that they literally extended and took up into Syria, into parts of what is now Turkey, and down into Hijaz. So for a period of time, they controlled Mecca and Medina. So this is a powerful group that is controlling in the heartlands of Islam, although it is not the major parts of Islam, not everybody, but they are controlling it on the surface. This is the Fatimid rulers. And they were smart enough that they would include other people. So they kept themselves as a ruling dynasty, using their bloodlines as a justification for the rules. They brought in Jewish scholars. They even brought the Christians. They brought all types of people underneath them, and they were able to thrive. And so science was thriving, education was thriving. The masses of the people who wanted to live a good life economically, and things were moving economically, allowed them to rule, because within their rule, there's a type of stability. But ultimately, it's not the rule of the Ahl Sunnah. It's not the Quran and the Sunnah. So it has no longevity. That is why you'll see the Fatimid dynasty pop up. Historians know this. But the average people, when they think of Cairo or Azhar, they don't think of the Fatimids. That is because they eventually deteriorated. And they ruled until 1171, until when the Fatimids actually called in the followers of the Kurdish Zengids, who called in Nuruddin Zengi, Imaduddin Zengi. This is Sunni people, but they were called into the area, and their intention was to fight the Crusaders, but eventually their rule came to Sultan Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, rahimahullah. And the great Sultan took power in Egypt. And a lot of people recognize and remember the Sultan for his defeat of the Crusaders and his liberation of Jerusalem. And no doubt that is his most famous achievement. But before that time, when he was consolidating the rule of the Muslims, because it was a united body that took Jerusalem, he re-established the Sunnah. So Jami al-Azhar was then changed into a Sunni school, going back to the original origin. And he also dethroned the last caliph of the Fatimids. And so the Fatimid rule then dwindled. And underneath the Fatimid rule, there are a number of elements, and we want to look briefly at some of these elements and go into it again, but to show you how the sects start to break up. There is a group during the Fatimid rule, the sixth Fatimid Caliph of Egypt, Al-Hakim bi Amrillah. Now, this is where the Bataniyah teachings go to the extreme, and he was claiming, and Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Darzi, they claim that this Caliph of the Fatimids was Allah in person. He was God incarnate. And so when they say Ali Allah, they would literally say Medad Ya Ali. They would say, help us, O Ali. They're saying like Ali is God. And they wouldn't say Al-Ali al-Azim. They would say Ali Allah. You see? So that's why you'll see a person, he will name his son Ali Akbar. And Ali is not Akbar, Allahu Akbar. But amongst them, that name is common. And so, but the masses of the people refused this, because the masses of the people, remember the Jama'ah, al-Amma, they refused this. And so they drove Ad-Darzi out. And he settled around the Shuf Mountains near Damascus and Lebanon. And he formed a group which took his name, Ad-Darzi, and they're called Duruz. So this Duruz group, he claimed a type of prophethood. He had his own book. He taught that they are the ones who have the real teachings. Only the men could read this book. He believed everybody else was going to hell except for his people. And they were underground. They became pacifistic in their ways. And these Duruz are still in the Muslim world today. You'll find the Duruz that are fighting for different armies. You'll even find them in Syria. You'll find them fighting for Israelis. You'll find them all around because they'll go underground following anybody. This is the Bataniyah, and this is the group called Duruz. And many people do not understand they are a Shia, they are a breakaway of Ismaili Batiniyah. So this has nothing to do with Itna Ashari Shia. Itna Ashari consider them to be outside of Islam. See the two streams. So this is Duruz group. Now, what is the reason why the Batiniyah teachings could not hold? Because look at the power of the Fatimid dynasty. Look at the economics. Look at how they spread. They controlled Mecca and Medina. Why? Because the basis of Batini rule is the negation of the Creator. Al-Hakim bi-amrillah. They're saying Allah is in him. They also invalidate the prophethood. Extreme concepts of imamate. The concept, the Ismaili concept of imamate, because these are Ismailis, right? Their concept, Fatimid Ismaili concept, is that the imam is immaculate. He's like a living God on earth. You pray to the imam. They invalidate the worship. So up until today, they do not pray 5 salat. They'll pray 3 salats, trying to make tafsir of the Quran. They deny the worships. They don't even believe in going to Mecca and Medina to make your pilgrimage to Hajj to Mecca. They don't believe that. You can go if you want to, but you need to visit the imams, the living imam and the dead imams. That's where you make your Hajj. They denied the hereafter. And so by this, they are literally introducing a new Sharia to their law. That's the weakness. And that's the reason why when Al-Hakim bi-amrillah is making these confused statements, the masses of the people were waiting for Salahuddin. And when Salahuddin came and brought the Sunnah back and established it, it was thriving. And Jami al-Azhar from that time until today becomes one of the great institutions. At one point, it was the greatest institution for the Ahl Sunnah in the whole of the Muslim world, especially after Baghdad fell. And so this is important that we understand the weakness of this Batini rule. Okay, and so it is from here that the Batini movement, the Fatimids, after the death of the 8th Fatimid Caliph, it broke into 2 wings, the Nizaris from the eldest son Nizar and the Musta'lis from his brother al-Musta'li. As far as the Musta'lis are concerned, they transferred their power to Yemen, but they went underground and they remained in obscurity for 500 years. When they came out, their teachings, they carried it to Gujarat in India. And you can still see traces of them. There's a group called Bohra. If you look at the picture, you will see the caps that the men wear. And they are Musta'li Ismailis. And you'll find them especially in India and in East Africa. Surprisingly enough, there are many Bohras in Kuwait. I went to Kuwait and found in the marketplace that there were so many Bohris there. When the time of Salat came, they just closed their shops and they went inside, right? They weren't making Salat with the main Jamaat because they have their own concepts. So this Bohra group, who are even in Canada and the UK, they're around, but they're very secretive group. And this is what is there from the Stalin groups. Okay? And basically, to give you another group that comes out of it, And this comes out of the Nizari side. And this is a group which is called Karamata. And the Karamata, based on Hamdan Kermit of Kufa. This is another Batini missionary. And he was a very aesthetic, Zahid type of person. He organized his movement and he went to the eastern side of Arabia and he carried out a series of brutal conquests. This is 9th century now. Remember when the Ismailis are spreading, right? So he's not following the Fatimids. He's like an old school type of Ismaili. And he goes to Ahsa, region of Arabia, powerful movement, to the point where they actually conquered Mecca and they stole the black stone. And they kept it in the Ahsa region for 23 years. Could you imagine this? The black stone of the Kaaba, until they were finally forced to give it up and to put it back. So these are the extremes that are coming out of the Bataniyah, that are coming out of the confused movement that broke away from the Itna Ashari Shia, and so many different groups that we need to look at and we need to understand. Again, they are not mainstream Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ said, Alaykum bil jama'ah wal amma wal masjid. Stick to the Jamaat, the main body of the believers. Stick to the masses of the Muslims. Stick to the masjid. Continue your practice of Islam, because these groups will come and they will go. But the ultimate teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, that is protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so keep this in mind as we look at the groups and as we go from section to section. Again, this is giving the Tawhidic approach. You go to a university and get confused because you think that these groups are similar to the Sunnah groups. They are not similar. They are breakaways that pop up and have power for a limited period of time. But they are not the main body of Islam, which will continue until the day of resurrection. And so with this, again, I want to open up the floor for any questions that you may have. We're going slowly to look at the groups and the breakaway sects in the Muslim world. If you have questions, you can put it into your chat. You can ask your questions. You can leave it with us. We'll deal with it next week. But I want to open the floor if there's any questions that anybody has right now. Remember, you can use your chat and you can start to ask your questions. So send that on, if you can, to the mainstream there. Any questions up until now? Floor is open for any questions.
There's a couple of questions, Sheikh, if you just want to look into the actual chat itself, Sheikh.
Okay.
So there is
one question is saying, I can see it here. It said, how does Sultan Salahuddin al-Ayyubi manage to bring back the Shafi'i Sunnah in a well-established Fatimid region? Again, that the Fatimid teachings were in the aristocrats. They were the rulers of Egypt at the time, but the masses of the people were still from the Sunnah. And so Salahuddin, who came in with a powerful force, he came in with the Zengids, the Kurdish Sunnah groups, and they literally took over power. So they defeated the Fatimids. So it was military as well. And they took over, and then they established the Sunnah, which easily could take over, because there's no base, there's no powerful base to the Batini teachings. Another question is saying people who okay, let me go further down. Okay, it is saying here, I wonder if you will ever talk about and reject the Taliban. This is the problem with you, okay, this is a person ranting and raving there, in our chat. But, the purpose of this is to understand the background, because we are being manipulated. We're being manipulated by the press. We're being manipulated by information, and that confuses people. So when you have a basis of the Quran and a basis of the Sunnah, then you are able to understand what is going on around you. If you don't have a basis, then you will start to make things equal. You will start to equate things. Okay, and so this is where, if you cut out history, if you don't know the past, then you're going to be confused in the present. So this is important, because even when you're dealing with concepts of the Taliban, if you do not understand who the Taliban are, if you don't understand the Russian occupation and the Mujahideen, the Taliban were only students in Pakistan. If you don't understand that the Taliban later represented a national movement, other groups are in the Taliban. If you don't understand this, then you will not really understand what is happening in Afghanistan as well. So it is crucial to have the background. And when the minds can understand, the background, then it is extremely important. Now, a question said, I never heard of Kufa. And this is important because now we know Basra, that is still there, but Kufa, literally because of the expansion, it is literally a Najaf. You have to go on the map and see what is now Najaf. So you will see that area there. Kufa is actually dissolved into it. But if you went back to an early map of Iraq, then you will see Kufa there as well. Okay.
There's a question about the remaining of the Bataniyah, Sheikh, in the northern region. You showed on the map, or has it vanished for the time being?
In the northern region?
So yeah, so the question is on the screen right now if you want to look at it. Are there any Bataniyah remaining?
Northern region, you showed the map. That is the map of North Africa. Okay. No, as far as North Africa is concerned, because I showed you the map where the Fatimids were. The basis there, the people in North Africa were basically Ahl Sunnah. It is a Maliki area. And Malikis are very powerful in terms of, dealing with straight Sunnah, because this is the teachings of Imam Malik. And so the Fatimid teachings, the Shia teachings literally do not have a base in North Africa at all. You'll see it more based in other areas going toward Iraq and Iran and other areas. But in North Africa itself, there is no base. Today, of course, the political situation has changed certain individuals, but in terms of this form of Bataniyah teachings, it doesn't exist. But if you understand the basis of the Bataniyah, then you can start to see movements that even happen today. And we are eventually going to move into movements which are connected to today. Now, I'm opening up the door, and you will see in the next class, Ismailis. This is an important concept that you need today. Duruz. This is an important concept you need today. Karamata is gone. And you will later see Baha'i up until today. So this is what we need to understand in order to have a basis coming from the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah to be able to look at history. History is not black and white. And amongst the Sunnah, We have political divisions. We have problems. We have individuals who come up and support dynasties, who support their egos. But the underlying movement of the Quran and Sunnah can be revived. That is where tajdeed comes in. And the Prophet ﷺ promised at the head of every 100 years, every generation, there would be a mujaddid. And that is the reason why we're still here today. Whereas the other movements come and they go. And so we need to get to clear our eyes as much as possible in dealing with the Sunnah, and to take it step by step as we move forward, to have a basis of it, and to separate the confusion, and to look at it from a Tawhidic perspective. Are there any more questions that you can see that is there? Alhamdulillah, we want to thank you, for your support. You should share this with your friends. It'll be on the YouTube. You can go to my YouTube channel, Abdullah.Quick, the Facebook channel as well, Sheikh Abdullah Hakim Quick, public figure. We need to share this information to bring in as many people as possible, to open this up to our community, because we are being manipulated by the press. We are being manipulated by secular academic institutions that are confusing our youth with terminologies. So along with our teachings of Quran and Sunnah, we need to have a Tawhidic understanding of history and realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ultimately the one who will control the flow of history. So I leave you with these thoughts, and I ask Allah to have mercy on me and you. Wa akhira da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.